Hello there, lovely internet person. So this month, I held a talk about how to make a game in 4 months at Creative Coast, which is this Swedish uh, game festival where you talk about the art and craft of video games. Um, and I figured I would upload this talk online, so anyone interested can take part on it. Uh, Please enjoy. Check out the timestamps in the video if you want to go to a specific section. So my name is Sebastian, obviously. So today I'm going to be sharing a couple of methods I used to get my latest game, Drillbird, finished within 4 months. But before I do that, I'm going to briefly introduce myself. I'm a game and level designer, although I do enjoy art and programming as well. And I got started making games in 2008 when Little Big Planet came out. I was 13 at the time, and I had played a lot of games before and loved the medium, but I never realized one could actually make them. So when Little Big Planet was announced, the idea of creating your own video games seemed really magical to me. So I saved up the money to buy myself a PlayStation 3 and got to making Little Big Planet levels. And then I was like an active part of the community, and a lot of the videos on this YouTube channel are actually me interacting or making Little Big Planet videos. Um, but a couple of years later, Tarsier Studios was looking for level designers from the community to help out with their Little Big Planet game for the PlayStation Vita. And among those community members, I was contacted and hired over the summer to design some of the game's minigames. At the time, I was 16, so this kind of cemented game development as a valid career path for me, and I've been pursuing game development professionally ever since then. Uh, and after that, I've helped make some games. While I was studying, uh, I contributed to the party climbing game Frog Climbers. And then after studying, I was hired at Tarsier again as a level designer to help make Little Nightmares 2. And then in my free time, I developed a strategy game called Birds with Feelings. And that took me 4 years. And then I joined Thunderful Malmö, a company called Thunderful Malmö, where I worked for 4 years, where I made some very exciting, but unfortunately secret stuff. Uh, and unfortunately, Thunderful closed down last November. And due to NDA, I cannot talk about my last 4 years of work. But on the plus side, I had 3 months of paid salary before becoming truly unemployed. So I decided to make a non commercial game within that time and release whatever I had at the end of those 3 months for free. And the game that came out of this was Drillbird. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So, what is Drillbird? I'm going to show you a cheeky trailer to give you an idea of the project scope or vibe, I guess. See if it loads. Yeah. So it is this digging platformer where you play as this tiny bird in a big world, and you're trying to make your egg hatch by getting ores for it. Oi, oi. And you have a drill as your beak. So you explore to find ores in the world, you sell those ores, and you grow stronger using the experience you gain by selling uh, to buy these beautiful upgrades, kind of. So that it has this dig, sell, upgrade loop, and that's the core of the game. Um, and throughout development, I was also joined by a couple of friends who also contributed to the project. Andrea Harty did a lot of the art. Hampus Melin did sounds and music. Lisa First Acuna created the game's logo and supported with noise acting. And finally, Isabel Newman came in towards the end and helped out to polish some of the cutscenes. So a huge shout out to the contributors for joining this project and helping out with it for free. We all just did this because we wanted to. It was really a fun time. But that's Drillbird. It's a tiny game made over 4 months. It became. It's completely free. Play it on itch.io. It's 1 to 3 hours long, and it is made using Godot and Assy Sprite. So this talk will be about how I made Drillbird over these 4 months. But first, I want to quickly go over why shorter games, like with shorter scopes, might be a fit for you. So why is making shorter games fun, and what benefits do they bring? And I think the biggest benefit here is that one gets to actually finish stuff. And finishing stuff is really overpowered. I think getting the experience of just going through the entire game development cycle is a great way to learn how to make games from start to finish. Personally, I would rather finish 5 games in 5 years rather than finishing one huge game because I will learn more from each game. There's just so much value gained from going through an entire production. And if one of my 5 games becomes successful, I can always expand upon that game now that I have found an audience for it. Uh, and if that 5 year project kind of fails, then you're kind of out of luck. But if 3 of your 1 year project fails, then you still have 2 other chances, kind of. So it's a way to not put all of your eggs in a single basket. I think another huge benefit is to avoid perfectionism. I think when making games, it's so easy to become laser focused on making the perfect game, and the scope grows with that perfectionistic thinking, and suddenly, the 4 month project turns into a 4 year project. And as I said, this happened to a previous game of mine, pictured here, called Birds with Feelings. It started out as a tiny summer project, but then the game kept growing and growing in scope, and we didn't properly assess how much that scope would cost us. And when we finally reached the finish line and released the game, it had been 4 years. Um, so by keeping the time commitment low, you learn to compromise and cut the non-essential stuff rather than trying to make like a perfect game. Uh, and I also think it's just way more fun to make short games. You get feedback much faster, iteration times are very quick, and if your game idea turns out to suck ass, that's okay because you only spent a short amount of time on it anyway. I have some cool shorter games with smaller scopes that I want to give an example of. We have the classic, quite famous A Short Hike. Really good. I think that was made in like half a year or something. We got Elekhead, I think is a really, really solid puzzle platformer that only has like an hour or two of runtime. Really, really solid game. We got VVVVV, which is a classic. Um, and then we finally have Downwell, which is also really good. And I feel like all of these games, I'm sure I'm saying I didn't do much research here, but I know at least A Short Hike had 6 months. But these games are all kind of shorter in scope, that like they don't take as much time from the player. You can delve deeper into them if you want to and spend more time, but they sell themselves as shorter experiences, and players appreciate that. But without any further ado, let's talk about how I went about finishing Drillbird in just a couple of months. I want to stop by highlighting that these tips works for me, but everyone's different. So I think what is important is to lean into the strategies that makes the process fun and interesting for you, right? Making art is quite individual. There's no perfect way to do it, but these are the tips that help me throughout this project that I have picked up over the years. So feel free to pick and choose what works for you. I'll let this picture of a baby about to be murdered simmer before I drink some coffee. While I drink some coffee. Mm. The first thing I did was to set myself a pretty short deadline. So when getting into Drillbird development, I didn't really have an idea of how long things would take. I was just getting started learning Godot. I hadn't programmed any full games before. So my strategy starting out was to just set an arbitrary 3 month deadline. And after this time, I would release whatever I had finished and then switch focus to job hunting. And personally, I really enjoy this approach. I think the short deadline kept me focused on making something short and sweet rather than trying to make the next big hit. Uh, and on the plus side, I do want to say that deadlines can be changed when needed. I set out to finish Drillbird in 3 months, but ended up shipping it after 4. And this is because the game grew a bit throughout development, which I was okay with. But I think if I had set myself, a 6 month deadline, the game would have been shipped after 8 months, or 1 year, it would be 1.5 year. So the short initial date still helped me a lot in keeping the scope tiny. And I think when setting a short deadline like this, or when working towards any deadline really, you'll find that you need to compromise a lot on your vision. You need to cut the non-essential stuff and focus on what is truly important for the game. And this skill is really, really valuable, and a short deadline will allow one to practice it. And I've symbolized this by drawing someone who's about to kill their baby, kill their feature, that they need to cut from the game. Very, very clear illustration. Yeah. um, yeah. So when doing that, you need to sacrifice a bit of your vision to focus on what's actually doable. Second thing I did was to work towards milestones with goals. Uh, in Drillbird's context, my definition of a milestone is a point in time where you take all of the features and levels and stuff you've been working on over time, and you put all of these puzzle pieces together, and you make a playable, polished build where these features work in tandem with one another. And then I test whatever I built on players and see what they experience. And I will be diving deeper into playtesting just a little bit later. I'm quite excited about playtesting. But this kind of lets me evaluate what I built so far, and it puts a clear deadline as well, where I like, oh shit, I need to actually wrap up. Let's do this. And I think planning milestones beforehand can be really powerful. It allows one to set a clear goal for this next chunk of development, and it puts some fire under the ass to actually get things done. If you know that you need to get 3 core systems done within the next 2 weeks, then you will not spend your time polishing a story sequence. You might not even need that sequence, but you will need those core systems. The cycle of development becomes to create a bunch of stuff, and then evaluate that stuff via playtesting, and then you plan the next stuff you will build, and then you get into the create mode again. And doing this makes game development feel a little bit like an ebb and flow, which fits my brain quite well. So I'll quickly go over how I structure Drillbird's milestones now. Here is an overview of Drillbird's production. I started out by making, so here was the first milestone, core loops. So I started out by the core gameplay loops, making sure you could jump, dig, get ores, sell them, and purchase upgrades to increase your stats. So the goal here was to make the dig, sell, upgrade loop experienceable, since it was such an important part of the 10-minute loop of Drillbird. And that came with quite a large amount of features, a lot of which I rushed in just to get something playable that I could evaluate. And after making this core, I playtested the game quite a bit over Christmas here, and I got some good data that the game was heading in a nice direction, but also good indicators for things that confused players. Tweaks to the player character that would be needed, and a lot of more things to consider. But the major thing here was that even in that simple, there were no enemies, just drilling blocks and digging for ores, the game was still really fun, and players wanted to play more. They ran through the entire level I had made for it, and then were excited about it. So that was a really nice signifier that I had something fun cooking here. The next milestone was the content complete milestone. I always chuckle at this because first we make the core and then we finish the rest of the game was kind of the vibe in this project. But the goal for this one was to make the game playable from start to end. It could be rough in some places, but there could be no unknowns after this one. I also had a feature freeze about here towards the middle of February, about 2 weeks before this milestone ended. And after this milestone, after this feature freeze, I wasn't allowed to add any new features, only polish and tweak existing ones. And that is because polish and tweaking and iterating takes a lot of time. So it's nice to give some time for that. This milestone ended with a playtest at a place called Game Dev Habitat in Malmö, where I got a lot of good, more feedback, and a lot of really great data on the tutorial section of the game, which received big updates in the next milestone. Milestone 3 focused on making a version of the game that was shippable. Not shipping the game, mind you, but making a version of it that I could release into the wild without shame. um, and then the next milestone was very focused on game promotion. This bad boy over here, yeah, as well as switching gears to focus on job hunting and other life stuff that had been procrastinating while making this game. Um, yeah, but there was like the last must fix bugs. I made a trailer and did some promo material, and the other contributors had some content that wanted to push in. Like, I need to add this art, or I have this music track that is now finished, and we could just like push that in there. And so I wasn't really working on the game. I was just implementing whatever they had cooking here, and doing the final must fix bugs. But as you can see, each milestone kind of has a very clear goal to work towards. We got getting the core loop ready, getting the game playable start to finish, getting the game to a shippable state, and then hitting the publish game button. And of course, these big goals can and should be broken down further and further into smaller goals and tasks. But the idea here is to have something very tangible to work towards, where like, okay, content complete is a really, really strong motivator. And if you can actually break down what that means, then that's what allows you to actually finish the game, right? Uh, and this also allowed me to like, in the middle of this milestone say, okay, I'm not doing these 5 features because I have to finish this game now. So let's cut those out and just focus on these features. And that's what this allows me to do. Again, putting some fire under the ass. So I mentioned having playtests at the end of each milestone, and I had a bunch of them in the middle of milestones as well. And this is because I love playtests. I think they are an incredible, powerful game development tool. So let's do a little bit of pros and cons of playtests. I think they breathe life into projects. Suddenly, you have actual real humans experiencing emotions about your game. Uh, they let you verify that the stuff you have created is doing what you want it to do. You don't have to guess, you can actually test it on real live human. You can catch a lot of readability issues early. Uh, and on the minus side, they do take a bit of time to do. Like they you need to actually sit down and put on the playtester research hat and data gathering hat rather than being deep in game development. And there is a high risk the ego will be humbled. They can be quite painful. And I do want to highlight here before I go on how I like to do playtests that the suggestions for how to change the game from playtesters is not necessarily the data you're looking for. A playtest lets you get data on a player's experience of playing the game, right? But the playtester themselves, they don't really know what would make your game better. They only spent an hour or so playing it. However, like the emotions the player felt when they playing, the things they were confused by, and maybe most importantly, the stuff they expected from the game based on how the game presents itself, that's the useful information in a playtest, and that's what you really want to write down. So when a player says, a classic example here is that like a player might say, "I wish the running speed was faster," and that's the player giving a solution to a problem they're experiencing. But then your goal as a analyst is to ask them, okay, but why do they feel this way? Were they bored? Like, isn't there enough going on in the level to like, do they need more stuff happening? Do they need to be more entertained? Like, this running speed can be solved in so many different ways. Was there something particular about their experience that made them want to have a faster running speed? Are they speedrunners? Like, what's going on here? There's a million solutions to the same problem, but their experience is still truth, right? And still really valuable to you. But when doing a playtest, here's what I like to do. Here's my research doodle. First off, I define what I'm hoping to evaluate with the test. Are there any parts in the game where I worry players will get stuck or bored? Is the game's pacing weird? Does the tutorial work? Do players understand, this one story beat, etc.? There's a lot of things that is tricky to know unless you test it out on people. Next, I arrange a playtest. I call a friend or acquaintance. I join an upcoming playtest session. Um, for example, as I said before, I joined uh, here in the beautiful city of Malmö. If you ever visit, uh, there's a community called the Game Dev Habitat, and they have quarterly playtests, and I joined that for Drillbird. And there I got a ton of good feedback, and I connected with like-minded nerds. But next, I do a stable build of the game that has all of the features needed to answer the defined questions. For example, all of the features needed to experience the Digsel upgrade loop in Drillbird. And then it's time for the actual playtest. Um, Before starting, I sit down with my tester to create some expectations. I remind them that they're not being evaluated, only the game is. They cannot fuck up or fail in this setting. They're just helping me out and being nice. If my game lacks a tutorial, I give them a rundown of the controls. Maybe I tell them like roughly how long the test is and some context around what state the game is at the moment. And if the tester feels comfortable, I sometimes ask them to narrate their experience when playing. And then it has come to what time that the time has come to watch them play in silence. And I would highly also recommend being in the same room as the tester and to watch them carefully, because most of the data is from simply watching them react to your game. If you are remote, you can also ask the tester to stream themselves playing and watch them. I think the important part is that you can see the player actually experience your game. And this is me. I'll get to that later. But I would highly recommend watching them play without giving any advice or comments or anything at all, really. I try to just like blend into the background when people playtest my game, as if I wasn't even there. And of course, the playtester is gonna get confused or misunderstand things, and that's okay. I let them. Because like when the game is actually finished, I won't be there to be a helping hand and influence them. They will be playing the game alone, and if I haven't caught how they got stuck and confused before I release the game, then they're gonna turn off the game, right? So I let the game do the talking, even if it is painful, and then all of that pain will turn into really useful things to fix, which I note down in my notebook. So I write down when the player is confused, when they get stuck, when they act in interesting ways, and any ideas I get when I watch them play. I also really like taking notes when the player is visibly having fun, because it helps hone in on what makes the game great. And again, I want to stress that most of my data comes from just watching people play, especially early on in the process when players commonly misunderstand mechanics or get stuck. Um, and this is really hard. It's hard to be silent and take notes and like not step in and try to influence someone's experience or explain yourself. Because for you it's like this work in progress that will change, and you wanna make sure they know that it's not finished and blah blah blah. But again, all of the pain you're experiencing does turn into very valuable data, and uh, you get a lot of bang for the buck by with this method, I think. Uh, After they finish playing, I like to finish with an interview where I get more data. Sometimes that is as simple as asking a couple of generic questions like, what did you think? What was your favorite or least favorite part? But you can also ask stuff relating to the questions you defined earlier. And lastly, I like to ask people's names and whether they would like to be in the playtester credits for the game. I think it's a nice way to thank them for their time, and it's also a nice way to build community, because when you actually release the game, you can poke them and be like, hey, the game is finished. Maybe you want to play it. And then maybe they'll play it. And you can high five. I don't know. It's just nice to build that type of community, I think. Or the gesture is really nice, and it's a win-win situation, kind of. I think playtests are one of the most important tools to making fun and interesting games. I understand that they're really scary. I am physically in pain every time I playtest, but all of the pain does turn into very tangible ways of making the game better. So highly recommend them. So let's say you do your playtest and you get a ton of things to fix. And of course, there's also other stuff you need to fix and do. You have features to build, maybe you have a settings screen in your game that you wanna need to finally implement, etc. No one talks about that during playtests. So how does one balance what to actually push next? Personally, I like to think about how much value a feature would bring to the player, balanced against the cost of said feature. And then I focus on the features with the most bang for the buck. Yeah, player versus value versus cost and risk. One can do this very literally. Welcome to my impromptu task tracker for Drillbird. Here I have grabbed a screenshot listing a number of issues found in the content complete version of the game. So the game, the second milestone of the game. Uh, First section here is category. Here I simply define what category the problem belongs to. So like the tutorial section of the game, maybe just a bug that I need to fix, LD is level design, etc., etc. And then in the problem section here, I specify the problem I'm trying to solve. So for example, you can see on line 21 here, oh, it's a bit hidden here. It says in tutorial, the drill up tutorial has people stuck and they exit and return to whence they came. It's a big problem I had to solve. And the reason I have this separation here, is because it clearly highlights why I am implementing a certain feature. Often I think it is easy to, you find a problem, and then immediately, like as you're watching someone play, you write down a solution for said problem. But maybe there are 10 other solutions for the problem you're having that you could be solving that would solve it, but in even cheaper ways or more effective ways. So if you actually write down the problem players are having, then it's way easier to later sit down, put on the designer hat, and actually solve that problem. Not when you're in like gathering data mode. So here the problem is that the player gets stuck in the tutorial, and I theorize that it's due to here. I have a suggested task. I think this is due to the open-ended start of the tutorial. Let's try to create a more closed-off tutorial vibe so that players won't feel they have undiscovered sections they have to explore. So that's my suggested like solution to this. But it could be a million other solutions. Maybe another designer would be like, let's add more arrows to the tutorial. But I don't want to do that for various reasons. But I like separating the two of them just to really uh, make it clear for myself why I am making the changes I'm doing. And sometimes this is like a bit unnecessary, like ghost wants despawn when dying, suggest a task, fix bug. Maybe I should have just like written this and suggested task and not had it in a problem. It's an evolving system, um, but then we get to the really, really juicy and good stuff that I think is of high use. The player value column grades all of the tasks from barely noticeable all the way up to extreme. And the next column contrasts that against the work needed, where 1 is less than an hour it would take to implement, 2 is hours, 3 is days, and 4 is like weeks. That's a huge task. And lastly, the last column, oh no, you can't see it in the recording. Oh, there we are. Nice. The last column is the value calculator. And this is really nice, I think. So this column is the player value divided by the work it would take to fix. And that way you can kind of get a value for how much bang for the buck a task would be to create. So for example, that ghost task I had earlier has a 4 here. You can't see it here. I can zoom out. Yeah, 4 here. The ghost despawn bug has the highest value here. It's very, very important to fix because players will not get stuck and it's relatively little work. So you get a 4 there, right? And yeah, I don't know. I think it's a pretty neat system when you have a lot of tasks that you need to sort through, especially like when I have a lot of smaller tasks and bigger tasks, and you want to weigh them against each other. Um, But of course, you can do this evaluation, this bang for the buck evaluation in other ways as well. In other cases, like just listing everything one wants to do in a document can help. When I had finished Drillbird's winter build, I did a document where I just listed all of the big features I could think of. Like, if I had all of the time in the world, what would the dream version of Drillbird look like? Uh, and then I wrote pros and cons of each package. Were there big unknowns and risks with some of the packages? Were some of them no-brainers, whereas others were only nice to haves? And based on this, I got to work making content for the game. So like I had a story meta package, a player package, the infrastructure package that was mostly cut at the end of the day, but I was really excited about this. The enemy hazards package and the UX package. Just like writing all this down really, really helped me at this stage in the process. Um, and then all of the tasks generated can then be summarized as an overarching milestone goal. And I would say that for me, when I plan games, I like to assume most things will take around twice as long as I think they will to get some more buffer and not constantly feel like I am under gunpoint. I think another important tip to ensure the game is of high quality is to spend about 50% of development time on just polish and iteration. I would recommend again setting a huge scope where one barely managed to finish all of the features before the deadline. Instead, I like to spend a large chunk of time on the last 10% of the game. And that's how you get, that sweet, sweet polish. I like working on things where each feature is playtested and polished to a mirror sheen. And that's also why I have, a feature freeze way before a deadline actually ends. So you can actually have time to polish those features. And to backtrack a little bit, I also want to highlight that while setting goals and task tracking is very important and could be useful, it's also important to just have fun and follow one's intuition. This is your art, and you're allowed to spend time however you want. I spent a third of Drillbird's production time adding cutscenes and story elements because they make me happy. I also don't think one should plan everything from the start. Give yourself some overarching goals, but let the details come to you as the game is taking more and more shape, and as you get more data from playtests. No project is fully formed at the idea stage. I think it's okay to trust the process and dare to iterate and pivot. So to summarize this section, I don't think it's important how you decide to prioritize and evaluate your tasks, but I do think consciously looking over what you have left to do and prioritizing the next step is a really, really useful practice. It allows you to take account of where you're standing and pivot if need be. So let's say you agree with me and you want to start building something tiny. How does one go about defining a project with a small enough scope? I think first thing, if you haven't played a lot of short games, it's easy to think only about big games when thinking about potential ideas for projects. For example, when making Drillbird, a part of me wanted to make a proper Metroidvania game, with abilities and multiple worlds and a story and dialogue, blah blah blah. And if you only play the bigger games, it can be hard to visualize what kind of feature density and scope a shorter experience may have. A way to remedy this is to just play some short games. Itch.io has a lot of smaller projects, for example. Just hopping on there to see what kind of scope decisions other people have made when making things, I think can help a lot. Aside from that, it is tricky to know if the thing you're planning is reasonable, before actually building it. And one way to go about that is to build the core of the game first and then test it. So once you have a playable version of the core gameplay of your game, the rest of development is just adding content to play and explore that core. And content is a lot easier to plan than the core gameplay and mechanics. Obviously, this shifts a bit from genre to genre, but I still think this sentiment holds about a lot of value. And finally, yeah, nice. And finally, when you discover that the things you want to put into the game are way too expensive to get polished in time, it's time to take out that axe and remove the features that take the most time to create and provide. Uh, you remove the features that take a lot of time without giving a lot of value, right? And I think this stands for all projects. Like they will only take form by cutting out the non-essential elements and making those sacrifices. So don't be afraid to murder your babies. Like you will have to murder them to get it done. And that stands true for a 4-month project or a 10-year project. So that's a lot of me talking about scope and process and playtesting. I now have 2 or 3 final tips that I think are very important. We're nearing the end. First of all, is to create a game that caters to your strengths as a game developer. So if you're an amazing artist, make a game that showcases that art. If you're a fantastic animator, create a game where juicy, responsive animations take the center stage. If you're a writer, create a game where the writing is front and center. AKA, do the things you enjoy and have fun with, and avoid the things you're not good at, unless you really want to learn them. That's also okay. um, and also have fun. What do you want to do? What inspires you? What makes you tick? That's what you should do, because it takes a lot of grit and persistence to make games. So you will need to, at least on some level, have fun, want to do the thing you're gonna do. So in my case, I love myself a good puzzle platformer with my Little Big Planet background. It's kind of my bread and butter. And I also love narrative and story, so I added one. But I'm not a pro coder. So in Drillbird, there's no procedural generation. There's no generated content at all. Everything is hand designed. There's not even any level transitions. Everything takes place in the same level, because I didn't need to fix that. And also, like, shaders seem like black magic to me. So Drillbird has no shaders. I've solved all of my problems using sprites and hand-drawn animations and a bit of particle systems. So I've tried to really cater to my strengths as a creator when making this, and take those shortcuts where I can take them and focus on having fun. My second tip is to not die. I think it's easy to enter a mode of thinking about one's game all the time, working super intensely, never letting up. And I think working extra hours, it's okay if it inspires you and if you feel like you want to do it. But the moment you feel like you have to do it, you're gonna have a bad time. And like, even if you want to do it, it does take a toll, even if it's fun. So I try to avoid working for extended amounts of time unless I have a really strict deadline. So most of the time I will do 7 or at most 8-hour workdays. And instead of working overtime, you can cut the low value features to focus on the ones that give a lot of bang for the buck. Uh, and again, like, making compromises here is the name of the game. I think a polished and thought through core will take one a lot further than lots of content and different features that kind of fight with each other. In short, games are not worth dying for, and you will do worse if you're overworked. So, to summarize, when I made Drillbird, I gave myself a deadline. I defined and worked towards milestones. I let the playtests guide the iterative process. I consciously chose what to build next. I started with the core and then iterated based on that. I did what I was good at and enjoyed, and I avoided working lots of overtime. But then I have like a final singer, like a last slide I threw in. Um, I think all of these tips are well and good. I think they're really useful if you are in the process of making something and want to create some structure and guidance in it. But first of all, you just gotta fucking start making something, right? And that won't happen by listening to internet people talk. Or so don't listen to me or anyone else, right? The only way to make shit is to actually make shit, right? So whatever you need to do to create an environment where you get to have fun creating, that's what you should do for yourself, right? So maybe you're this guy who can only draw while they're on the back, or maybe this guy that must be hung upside down and left alone for several hours, and then they finally feel like, now I feel inspired and creative. Um, Whatever you need to do to create an environment of creativity, do that. Give yourself that luxury. You know, if you're like me, I need a group of friends to bounce ideas off of, and for them to tell me I'm a good boy, and for me to feel accountable to be creative. And my creativity also plummets if I am forced to interact with social media, which is great for marketing, I assure you. Uh, you can also like create stuff in secret, not showing it to anyone. This is a nice way to alleviate performance anxiety. You can create stuff using a medium you haven't used before, like paper mache or cardboard. You can focus on just creating something while learning a new tool or program. I think the key here is to find a way to channel that creative flow and allow for whatever that is to blossom. And then once you have it blossoming, then you kind of can put it into structure and be disciplined. Sorry, and do more planning shenanigans. Uh, but what I'm trying to say here is that Drillbird didn't start out as a plan for a fully formed game. It started out as me having fun and uh, consistently working in an engine I hadn't used before. Uh, and by thinking about the final result of a project, it's easy to get stuck in analysis mode instead of getting out there and actually making stuff. So trust the process and just like do the thing. Force yourself to do the thing and take one step at a time. And the kind of final result will get there, but focus on the process and have fun along the way. So fucking go make something. Go do it. Don't be bad. No, I mean don't be scared. But that's all I've got for today. Thank if you've listened all through, fellow internet person. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this talk and would like to support me, feel free to give Drillbird a go on itch.io. It is free, it is short, and it is pretty good. Normally, I would open up the floor for questions now, but since I'm just sitting in my kitchen with a camera in front of me, I will end here. Thank you so much for listening and have a nice day.